We're good now? Okay, sounds like we're on. Good evening, everyone. As we get started for tonight's class, I want you to help me make some predictions. Just think of these in your own mind. Think of the answers in your own mind. You don't have to shout them out unless you just really want to, and that's fine. Who's going to be elected president in 2024? What do you think the value of the U.S. dollar is going to be over the next 12 months? Or how are the national boundaries going to be drawn in Eastern Europe 5 years from now? Okay, think of your answer and just recognize that if I polled everyone, we could all spend the entire night arguing our case about this. Why can't we predict something like this? Because it's unpredictable, right? It's something to be stressed out about, something not predictable. Let's play another game. Help me predict what's going to happen with these two kids. Meltdown, okay? Something's going on over here. Child 1 obviously already had some food here. Child 2 has food. I'm taking this child's food. Is this going to go well? No. Let's do another scenario. Sam is pulled over. This is not Sam's car. Sam drives a 97 Jeep Wrangler. Sometimes it's got the top down. And a police officer pulls me over for a traffic violation. And by the time he gets to the door, I put it in gear, gun it, and go down the highway as fast as a 97 Jeep Wrangler goes. How's that going to end? Can we all agree what's going to happen in that situation? It's going to be a high-speed pursuit. Sam's going to jail, probably. Maybe not trying to stress anybody out. Let's say we have an unprovoked intercontinental ballistic missile gets launched on the United States, one of our larger cities. Can you predict what's going to happen with the United States? Can you predict what we're going to do in reaction to that? It depends who's president. Yeah. We're probably going to war, aren't we? There are some things that aren't predictable, but there are some things that are very predictable. One of the things that's very predictable is how we react when injustice is done to us. All three examples that I just gave back there is an example of an injustice happening to someone else, isn't it? A child whose food is taken away, that child is going to retaliate in some form. I watched two boys up here slapping stickers on the other back, and they didn't like it. So what were they doing? This was escalating really quickly because they were getting back at each other over and over and over again. Here Sam got pulled over, and he was probably going to get a warning maybe, and now he's what? Now he's in bigger trouble, right? Because of injustice. And the same thing, we retaliate, don't we? The way we react is very, very predictable. As humanity, we are very predictable, and especially in injustices. We're going to read tonight about the account of Abigail. If you got your Bibles, I want you to turn along with us. We're going to read from 1 Samuel 25, 1 Samuel chapter 25, and we're going to read about the account of Abigail. And we're going to find out that Abigail reacts in a very unpredictable way, or you might say a remarkable way, in the face of injustice. We're going to break that down, and we're going to talk about that this evening. As we're turning there, let's get a little bit of context for where we are. For those of you that have read the account or familiar with this book, help me explain, where are we in Israel's history? Saul is king, so we've got a united kingdom. This is not the period of the judges. That's where we were when we were talking about Ruth. So this is after that. We're talking about David. David is here on the scene. We're going to read a lot about him. And what's going on between Saul and David at this point? That's another important context. At the beginning of chapter 25, Samuel, the last judge, a prophet, spokesman for God, very much a spiritual leader in Israel, has just passed away. And David, as Nate said, he's on the run from Saul, who's trying to kill him. David's been anointed king, actually, in place of Saul. Saul has been rejected as king by God, and Saul is pursuing him. He's running for his life, and he's not alone. David has about 600 men with him. We'll read about those men later in this chapter. You can also read about some of the men that he accumulated with him along the way. What kind of men are these that David has with him, by the way? These are strong men. There's a group of men called the mighty men of David. You can read about them in 1 Chronicles. These are fighting men. These are warriors. They're there to protect David's life and help David out however he can. So Saul has briefly called off the hunt for David. And in 1 Samuel 25, these maps are kind of hard to see. I apologize for that. I was trying to get some good ones. If you're familiar with the geography of Israel, you can see the Sea of Galilee right up here, Jordan River, the Dead Sea. This is the little tip of the Red Sea right here. You can see that Red Sea right here. We find out that David is in the wilderness of Paran. This would be kind of the area, this would be Sinai down around this area, and Paran would be maybe this area up kind of northwest, south of the Dead Sea. That's our best guess as to where he is. This wilderness of Paran, by the way, is also where probably Joshua and Caleb, or the 12 spies were before they started spying the land. Also where Ishmael and Hagar get sent out. Ishmael finds himself dwelling in that land. If you want to read about those, you can find this place. It's mentioned frequently in Scriptures. And this is kind of the area. Don't worry about the text. It's not super important. But this is kind of the area that we're talking about. We've got the Dead Sea. We've got Maon right here, which is a city. And then Carmel is going to come into play as well. So we'll talk about that. Also, give me help me understand the historical context. Let's talk a little bit about what's the culture like. If you're living in Israel and you're well-to-do, what is it that you have? Lots of. Got lots of sheep, don't you? Lots of livestock. That's how our wealth is measured at this time. There is lots of sheep. And in 1 Samuel 25, we can just read the first couple of verses there. We'll start in verse 1, towards the end of verse 1. Then David rose, went down to the wilderness of Paran. There was a man in Maon whose business was in Carmel. The man was very rich. He had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. He was shearing his sheep in Carmel. Now the name of the man was Nabal, and the name of his wife Abigail. The woman was discerning and beautiful, but the man was harsh and badly behaved. He was a Calebite. All right. So Nabal is wealthy, and he's not just wealthy, we could say he's distinguished. He's got 3,000 sheep, 1,000 goats. Remember in the book of Job, if you've read that, Job is a very wealthy man. He's got 7,000 sheep. So he's maybe about half of Job's wealth, still very well-to-do. And it also says that he's a Calebite. This leads me to think he's from the family or the lineage of Caleb, one of those two faithful spies. Possible there's some other lineage there, but that's worth noting by the author here. So he's not only a wealthy man, but he ought to be a very distinguished man, too. He's got some family history as well. This is a time of sheep shearing. He's going up to Carmel. He's from Maon. He's going up to Carmel to shear his sheep. And the thing to understand about the sheep shearing time is that this is a time, usually probably in the spring as best I can tell, where all the sheep are gathered together, the shearing takes place. It's the harvest, so to speak, getting the wool off of those sheep. And historically, this is a time of feasting. There's a lot. There's plenty. It's a time of generosity for some. And we're going to find out there's a feast day of there. This is the culmination of the year's work with these sheep, keeping these sheep alive, and now we get to benefit from keeping them this whole time. And David has been with these sheep and these shepherds in the wilderness of Paran down towards the south. Let's look at the characters that we have before we dive deeper into the text. We've got David. What are some things we know about David? You cannot have a Bible class about David without saying that he was a man after God's own heart. I'll take that one for you. What are some other words you would use to describe David? From this text or any other text you know. How would you describe David? Capable, good. Courageous, I like it. He's a warrior. You're going to see that's very evident in these passages. He's a shepherd too. He knows the value of sheep. He had to live that life for quite a while. Yeah. He is emotional. Yeah, he's one that has his emotions it seems like, from what we read, close to the surface. We see him crying about Absalom out loud. We read the Psalms where he's pouring his emotions out. We're going to see a different kind of emotion in the text this evening as well. Good. Anything else you want to add? He's a leader? Absolutely. And if nothing else that we remember about David is that he is a good and he is a godly man. He is God's anointed in a sense. He has been anointed to be king in place of Saul. Then we have this man Nabal. This is, as far as I can tell, this is the only place we read about Nabal. His name literally means fool. I don't know if that's, I don't know what possesses someone to name their child fool. I don't know if that, I'm hoping this was just a nickname he gathered over the years. But it's literally his name, and if it's not his given name, it's a nickname he earned by reputation that we're going to see in the text. He's described as harsh and badly behaved. Does anybody else have any words in their translations besides harsh, badly behaved? If you get the King James Version, kudos to you. This is the word of the day if you get the King James Version. No? Knucklehead? It's not in the King. That's in the. I think that's the Message Bible. He was a knucklehead. Any other translations? Crude. So we've got crude, mean, churlish. There's the word of the day. He was churlish. That's been my word. I've just been thinking about that word, churlish. Surly, cruel. We get the idea here that this is not a good guy. This is a foolish man. And he's also got a mean streak in him as well. And somehow he managed to marry Abigail, who's described as beautiful. And what's the other word that's used to describe her from the text we just read? Intelligent, discerning. Some people say discerning. Intelligent seems to be a common word that's translated there. That would fit with what we see about Abigail. But some better words for that would be things like discerning or understanding, wise. It's the complete opposite of who Nabal is in the text we're going to see. Anything else anybody wants to add to that? Please feel free. You're doing great. Chime in. You don't have to raise your hand, but if I'm not seeing you, raise your hand and I'll call on you. All right, let's dig a little bit deeper into the text. Let's read about the events as they unfold. We've got some context now. We know who our characters are. We know who's in this text. Let's start in verse 4. We'll read verses 4 through 8. David heard in the wilderness that Nabal was shearing his sheep. So David sent 10 young men. And David said to the young men, "Go up to Carmel and go to Nabal and greet him in my name. And thus you shall greet him. Peace be to you, and peace be to your house, and peace be to all that you have. I hear that you have shearers. Now your shepherds have been with us, and we did them no harm, and they missed nothing all the time they were in Carmel. Ask your young men, and they will tell you. Therefore, let my young men find favor in your eyes, for we come on a feast day. Please give whatever you have at hand to your servants and to your son, David." All right, so David's been in this wilderness area, or in this area where the sheep are being tended. And with sheep, I'm sure you move around a lot, trying to find pasture for them, or a place for them to eat, or a place for them to be protected. And whether it was in one place or whether they were moving about, David and his 600 men with him were doing what the whole time? According to David. Guarding. Keeping protection. Is that important when you're in the wilderness area? There's nobody else. This is this man's entire wealth sitting helpless in the wilderness. At any time, could a Philistine band come up and raid these sheep? Just take what they want. And no one, you might not even know until it's too late. So David is providing a very valuable service simply in protection. Now, it's not a mafia racket. A mafia racket would look something like this. The protection racket would be, Vinny and his goons noticed that you've got some shearers up in Carmel, And it'd be a shame if anything bad happened to those sheep in the wilderness. Is that the kind of racket that David's running in this? If you're saying no, why are you saying no? What is different about this than some kind of form of extortion that David might be doing? What makes you say that? He's saying this after the fact, right? He's not threatening anything. This has happened already after the fact. The work is done. By the way, we were keeping watch on everything the entire time. Good point. What else? He come. Yeah. He could have demanded it. He might have even been within his right to demand something like that, but he doesn't come demanding. He's actually coming very humbly to Nabal. He's asking, whatever you can spare for, how does he describe himself? Your servant. Whatever you can give to your servant, right? So he's not demanding. He's saying this after the fact. What else? What else is unique about the way he's presenting this? How about he's backing up what he said? If you doubt that we were actually the ones doing this, just ask anybody that works for you, and they will tell you the truth. We were keeping watch on this. We were watching them. Today's a feast day, he says in verse 8. And he says, could we have something? Whatever you have, anything that you're willing to give. Does he name an amount? Doesn't name an amount, just anything you're willing to give for us. We've got 600 men to feed here. We've been eating locusts and wild honey in the wilderness over here. We could use something a little more nourishing. In short, David's message is respectful, it's honest, and it's simple. It's not demanding. And a reasonable person might do what? Might think to themselves, what? What would you think if you were Nabal? What's that? I owe him a little something, right? So he didn't have to do this. He's saying this after the fact. I probably owe him something, right? Good, yeah. What else? Maybe if you're a forward-thinking sheep herder, what are you thinking? Yeah, maybe if I'm really good to him, he'll protect these sheep next year, right? That's a good idea. Yeah, this guy's going to be king one day. Maybe I could get on his good side and we could make some kind of alliance at some point. I want to be on the king's side, right? Especially if he could tax me at any point, or worse, he could tax me or just conscript things, for his service. So he could have done all those things, right? Anything else? Yeah, that's another great point. He could have done it in the middle of the sheep shearing. Hey, got anything we can have? No, this is the feast. This is when it seems like everything's done, or it's a time to rest, relax, and have a good time, right? So he goes on what should be a generous time. This could be the beginning of a beautiful friendship, but Nabal is not a reasonable person. Let's find out what Nabal does. Let's read verses 9 through 12. When David's young men came, they said all this to Nabal in the name of David, and then they waited. And Nabal answered David's servants, "Who is David? Who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants these days who are breaking away from their masters. Shall I take my bread and my water and my meat that I have killed for my shearers and give it to men who come from I do not know where?" So David's young men turned away and came back and told him all this. All right. It's not only not reasonable. What is Nabal in his response? How would you describe his response? It's not reasonable. We've already established that. It's arrogant. It's what? Caustic and insulting. Absolutely, it's insulting. It's dismissive. It's churlish. I love it. If we were in Toastmasters, I'd give you some Toastmasters points for using the word of the day. Yes, absolutely. It's all of those things. Would he have been within his right to refuse David? Would that be okay? Would there be anything wrong with that? It would be okay. They are his things, right? And David did make a request. There's nothing wrong with saying no. It may not be wise, but there was nothing wrong about saying no. This takes it to a whole new level. This is absolutely insulting. He asks, who is David? Who is the son of Jesse? Do you think Nabal does not know? I've never heard David. That sounds kind of familiar. I'm not really sure. Do you think, is that what he's saying with that? He doesn't know who David is? What is he saying? Yeah, for not knowing who he is, he knew who his dad was. Nate's already made the point, you could get on the future king's good side. Actually, David is well known throughout the kingdom. We've got a top 100, or top 40 billboard hit about David that all the women are singing, right? Saul has killed his thousands, David his 10,000s. Everybody knows this about David. Everybody knows who he is. He's not asking for information. It's a rhetorical question that's designed to do what? Margaret said it a little bit earlier. It's designed to dismiss David. In other words, who is he that I should even pay attention? I don't care who David is, or this son of Jesse. Let's not even call him by his name. Let's call him by his family's name.
Yes, he is on the run from Saul, but the idea that he was running from his master like some runaway slave.
Yeah.
It was just also just very. The message David brought was one of and hey, you're in the area, we get to do something.
Yep.
If you can, it's not full time, but he made him sound like some.
Absolutely. He did. Absolutely. He's dismissing him just for who he is, first of all, and then he calls him a runaway slave. That's putting him in his place. I'm up here, David's down here.
We also know from first name of David, he goes and he's taking plunder. He sends money, oil, different cities, and to the elders of those towns, basically thanking them for helping. So you assume that at this point he's already getting help from other places. They all.
Yeah. Yeah, good point. He's distinct. There's some examples of David receiving support from other locations. Nabal is one to just exclude himself from all of this. Absolutely. You expect me to give you what's mine? How many times, if you just want an exercise, underline how many times does he say, my, mine, over and over and over again? Me, me in that. It's really about what Nabal has, and he's insulted that anyone would dare ask him for what he worked so hard for. Never mind what David provided in all of that. In short, Nabal is insulting, he's evil, and of course he's very foolish. Well, verse 13, let's see what happens with David's response. Verse 13 says, after David's men come back, David said to his men, every man strap on his sword. And every man of them strapped on his sword. David also strapped on his sword. About 400 men went up with David, while 200 remained with the baggage. You can skip down verse 21. Things are told a little bit out of order chronologically. We can see what's going on in David's mind. Verse 21, David had said, surely in vain have I guarded all that this fellow has in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that belonged to him. And he has returned me evil for good. That escalated very quickly, didn't it? It went through the roof. Does David's response seem unreasonable to you? Not for a warrior, it's not unreasonable, okay?
There was, I know you should go over it from a purpose, but you look at the context there, like what was it at Abigail, get a little bit more context, just what happened with their first thing say they were weeping souls back at David, very unjustly. Think about someone in courtship that is courtship or some sort of warrior type of position role. When a delegation comes to the United States, we treat them that way. You can expect sanctions, expect all kinds of stuff. So the fact that he's stuck on his word, I don't think it's unreasonable, but definitely
Good point. Let me rephrase the question real quick, and then you've already answered it. Is this predictable behavior of David? Let me just spend the first part of our class talking about what's predictable about some of these things. Is David acting in a very predictable way for somebody that's been treated that way? Yeah, he is.
I would say
Yeah. Yeah. So it's predictable. It's not just his honor. It's not just him that's being mistreated. It's his men as well. The work that they've done has been in vain. Yeah. Yeah. You could just see all of this happening, especially if you've read this before. If you had never read this before, you could predict what was going to be coming next. Strapping on the sword, he's getting ready, actually, we're going to find out later, to kill every single male in Nabal's house. All those sheep shearers and shepherds they were protecting, I guess they were about to mow them down. But in another sense, it may be predictable, but we're talking about David here, and in another sense, it is very unreasonable for David. Let me ask you this. Isn't this the same David that, I don't know how much time has elapsed actually, but we could just go back a chapter in the book of 1 Samuel and read about David having an opportunity in a cave to kill Saul, right? Now, is what Saul's been doing right to David? Has there been any call for this? Is this not injustice on David's part? And he finds Saul in the cave, and his men talk to him and say, look, here's the day that the Lord has been talking about. 1 Samuel 24, verse 4, when the Lord said, behold, I will give your enemy into your hand, and you shall do to him as it shall seem good to you. So they're trying to quote God's word at him, and they're probably misquoting it. Seems like everything's lining up, and what does David refuse to do? He's not going to put out his hand against God's anointed and take vengeance for himself. David actually understands some important principles, but Philip was pointing out, emotions, when emotions get in the way, and this anger, it is a righteous anger in a sense too. It's not an unreasonable anger in that sense. In other words, he points out, verse 21, he has returned for me evil for good. It's not about the goods anymore at this point. It's about, I did something good, and you should have done the good thing too. Have you ever been faced with that in life? You ever had evil given out to you or watched evil dispensed when there was no call for that? In fact, when there was actually the opposite called for? You can see that. We can see that in life. And we may get that same feeling that David had. Don't you want to remind David of that as you're reading this? Remind David, rebuke him. Tell him what he needs to hear, at a distance, of course, because he's got this sword drawn. David should know better than this. And enter Abigail. Abigail does understand these things as well, understands who David is, and she's got a great plan, a very wise, a very discerning plan that we can take some lessons from. So she's intelligent and she's discerning. Let's talk about some of the things that she is able to discern. Let's read verses 14 through 17 as we get started. One of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, behold, David sent messengers out of the wilderness to greet our master, and he railed at them. Yet the men were very good to us, and we suffered no harm. We did not miss anything when we were in the fields as long as we went with them. They were a wall to us, both night and by day, all the while we were with them, keeping the sheep. Now therefore know this and consider what you should do, for harm is determined against our master and against all this house, and he is such a worthless man that one cannot speak to him. Then Abigail made haste and took 200 loaves and 2 skins of wine and 5 sheep already prepared and 5 seahs of parched grain and 100 clusters of raisins and 200 cakes of figs and laid them on donkeys. And she said to her young men, "Go on before me, before I come after you." But she did not tell her husband Nabal. All right. So the servant urgently recounts what's going on. He says, he tells him everything that David had already said to Nabal. And she perceives that if there's a chance to avert this crisis, it's not going to be through Nabal, right? The servants recognize that. The servants see this situation for what it is, too. We can't talk. You are not going to reason with Nabal. The servants know this. She knows this, too. And she knows that if there's a hope of averting a very bad tragedy at a number of levels, it's going to be with David. Whether she'd ever heard the proverb or not, she did understand Proverbs 15 verse 1, a soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. So I think she can perceive that there's bigger things going on than just people are about to die. But she wants to, step one, do what is right. She's going to get David what he asked for. And more than that. Actually, much more than a day's rations. I mean, I was reading some commentary. This is a description of the food. Apparently, we have a historical record of some kind of Egyptian expedition. This is like the food that you would take, the amount of food you would take on an expedition somewhere to go explore, to go map something out. This is a large amount of food for what they're going to need. Very generous offering. We've talked about predictable. When Abigail meets David on the way, she does absolutely nothing that would be predictable. Let's read verses 23 through the following. Or let's start in verse 20. As she rode on the donkey and came down under the cover of the mountain, behold, David and his men came down toward her. We've already read verse 21 and 22. We'll skip to verse 23. When Abigail saw David, she hurried, got down from the donkey, and fell before David on her face and bowed to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, "On me alone, Lord, be the guilt. Please let your servant speak in your ears and hear the words of your servant." What are some things that she's doing? First, we read verse 23, she falls down before David on her face, bows to the ground. Put yourself in David's position for a moment. You are what? Verses 20 through 21, it sounds to me like what you start telling yourself, like it's more like speaking to yourself. You're working yourself up into a bigger anger the entire time. Have you ever find yourself doing that? Just, I can't believe he did that. Here, I was protecting. He's done evil for good, muttering to himself, and all of a sudden, Abigail comes into view. You've got your sword strapped, and what does she do? Falls flat down on the ground, right? I'm a little off balance now. I'm a little caught off balance. What is going on? Might be going through David's mind. She falls at his feet and says, what? On me alone be the guilt. I take responsibility for what just happened at my house. What? If you want to kill anyone, kill who, is she saying? Kill me. You're ready to kill somebody, kill me. I'm responsible for this. I'd be speechless. Verse 25, she says, "Let not my Lord regard this worthless fellow, Nabal. For as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name," means fool, "and folly is with him. But I, your servant, did not see the young men of my Lord whom you sent." She goes also and points to him. You were right. You're right. Nabal was a fool. Nabal did the wrong thing. If I had been there, I would not have let this get this way. I don't know about you, but I would be almost completely disarmed by that point. It's a complete turn of events. It's not predictable at all. If I'm David, I'm speechless, and she has my attention. She has my attention, and she wants his attention. And we're going to talk about why she wants his attention. It's more than just people dying. It's more than just about this food, even with Abigail. Before we read some more verses, any thoughts anybody wants to add to all of that? She might have experience. She's got the drill on. She had the lambs prepared already. It's just like, this is the Nabal stock. It could be. There's something else remarkable about her is she's committed to her man. Regardless, she made a commitment, and she's going to, in her own way, as much as she can, she's going to honor Nabal. Like she's going above and beyond. There's a great quote I read. Mercy is when you don't do something. In other words, this should be in my power to not do something. I could kill you. I'm not going to kill you. That would be mercy, right? But grace is doing what she does, right? This is going, does Nabal deserve this at any level? Did we say Nabal deserves this woman? No. Not anything that she is and not anything that she's doing, but she is going above and beyond, as Nate pointed out. Word?
Respects him, she doesn't agree with what he did. Right? So she was able to take matters in her own hands in a respectful way. And she's going to go back and tell Nabal. But she recognizes that just because my husband did something that I don't agree with, that's wrong, I'm going to try to make it right. And I'm going to go out and do that. I think that should be something that we all.
Yeah, she didn't agree with Nabal. She makes a point of pointing that out, but she's going to do the right thing, and she's going to find the way to respect him. One of the ways she is respecting him is by just respecting his life, right? The life of him, his business, his property, and everything else. What would have been very easy for her to do had she seen this calamity coming? Yep. Just kind of quietly back away from that, let David do what he's going to do, and then my problems are solved, right? Can you imagine living with this man? She could have in a sense, she would have actually done what she's advising David to not do, which is take vengeance, take justice, take salvation into her own hands. That's really what this is about. That's really what Abigail, when we say she's discerning, she discerns something even bigger than the immediate circumstances. She's a very, very wise woman. Great points. Anything else? Yeah. My Lord. Yeah, paying homage, especially when all those insults coming out, would have been very disarming to David. Absolutely. Well, Abigail knows where God is in all of this. Let's read a couple more verses. Let's start making some other points about some things that Abigail perceives. Let's skip down to, she asks, verse 26, Now then, my Lord, as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, because the Lord has restrained you from blood guilt and from saving with your own hand, now then let your enemies and those who do evil to my Lord be as Nabal. And now let this present that your servant has brought to my Lord be given to the young men who follow my Lord. Please forgive the trespass of your servant, for the Lord will certainly make my Lord a sure house, because my Lord is fighting the battles of the Lord, of Yahweh. And evil shall not be found in you so long as you live. If men rise up to pursue you and to seek your life, the life of my Lord shall be bound in the bundle of the living, in the care of Yahweh your God. And the lives of your enemies he shall sling out as from the hollow of a sling. And when the Lord has done to my Lord, according to all the good that he has spoken concerning you, and has appointed you prince over Israel, my Lord shall have no cause of grief or pangs of conscience for having shed blood without cause, or for my Lord taking vengeance himself. And when Yahweh has dealt well with my Lord, then remember your servant. There's a lot packed in there. There's a lot that she is saying with that. One of the things that she's pointing out is she sees God in all of this. She sees her God. She sees David's God. She sees our God in all of that. Verse 28. Yahweh will certainly make my Lord. I'm just saying, I'm going to use God's name as Yahweh because it gets confusing when we substitute that word, the Lord versus my Lord. Yahweh will certainly make my Lord a sure house. Verse 28. David is fighting the battles of Yahweh. If men rise up to pursue you and to seek your life, the life of my Lord shall be bound in the bundle of the living in the care of Yahweh your God. That's the idea of securing some valuables, or possibly literally his name is written in a book of life, bound up. She sees God in all this, and she sees David on God's side. Verse 29, the lives of your enemies he shall sling out as from the hollow of a sling. God is going to punish your enemies, she's telling him. Hint, hint, not you. You're not going to punish your enemies. And that imagery of the sling, how would that be to David's mind? Thinking of the time when he was a shepherd himself, or maybe facing a giant himself, and there was no doubt as to who was avenging him or avenging his people. When the good he has spoken concerning you, verse 30, and he has appointed you prince over Israel. Verse 31, this is really great. When Yahweh has dealt well with my Lord, then remember your servant. It's going to happen. So, first thing we can see about what she can perceive, what she discerns, is that this is not the end of a story. This story is going to go on, and you have a big role to play for God, His kingdom, and His people. And God is on your side. That's a great foundation to start with, actually, as she's making this case. Abigail does something very wise in this, too. You notice how she talks to him. Verse 28, evil shall not be found in you so long as you live. He's about to go murder somebody, murder an entire household. Evil shall not be found in you as long as you live. Verse 32, you're going to keep a clean conscience about this, she tells him. When God's established you, you're not going to have anything eating away at your conscience after this. You see what she's doing in all this? She's talking to David like he already is the man that she knows he's going to be. He's already done it in her mind. You are better than this, is essentially what she's saying without chewing him out. You see how persuasive that actually is? She's treating him like the man she knows that he's going to be. In short, Abigail very wisely understands that this is not right, what is about to happen. Peace is a priority because lives are at stake. David's on God's side. God's on David's side. And David needs to stay on God's side for his own sake. Grace that she shows is more important than her own sense of justice or David's own sense of justice. It's more important than her own dignity in all of this. She didn't owe anything in this. She didn't owe anybody in this. And here she is calling David my Lord, bowing down and providing things to him and his men. It's more important to her than her own life that these big things take place. That's not what we call predictable. That's called remarkable. That's called remarkable. David recognizes that. What else would you add to this conversation? How else is Abigail remarkable? Very courageous in all that, yes. To remind him. This was an opportunity she saw, and maybe it felt like a slim chance to her, but it was important to her. It was important to her for herself and for David. She valued who David was going to be. Great point. What else would you add? All right, we're going to run out of time if we're not careful. So we've got about 5 minutes. Let me read these and we'll make a couple of closing thoughts. Verse 32, David said to Abigail, "Blessed be the Lord, God of Israel, who sent you this day to meet me. Blessed be your discretion, and blessed be you who have kept me this day from blood guilt and from avenging myself with my own hand. For as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, who has restrained me from hurting you, unless you had hurried and come to meet me, truly by morning there had not been left to Nabal so much as one male." Then David received from her hand what she had brought him, and he said to her, "Go up in peace to your house. See, I have obeyed your voice, and I have granted your petition." So he praises her for her discretion. We can read in verse 36 through 38, Abigail always remains dignified in all of this. She goes back, she sees Nabal drunk out of his mind and knows this is not the time to get into this with him. When he sobers up, she lets him know exactly what happened, and whether because he realized he had a close call or he's still playing the fool, it says his heart was like a stone. I'd like to think he had an aneurysm or something. He just got so angry that he just like had a heart attack. 10 days later he dies, and then David, valuing Abigail, asks her to come. He marries her. Seems like she was ready to get married as well. She didn't tarry at all. A good ending for what could have been a big tragedy. Could have been actually a mark against David, very similar to his sin with Bathsheba. That was a major crisis, major iceberg. He just worked his way around with Abigail's help. So let's talk about some things that we can take from that. We've already seen the discretion and wisdom from Abigail. So it's really easy when somebody does evil to us, especially when we've done good, it's easy to want to get even, isn't it? Very easy. It's natural. It's predictable. But showing grace and letting God handle it is the best way. It's unpredictable. It's unusual. It's actually what we're called to do as God's people. God's people have been called to do that then, and we're called to do it now. 1 Peter 3, verse 9. Do not repay evil for evil or reviling for reviling, but on the contrary, bless. For to this you were called. That's your job, is what Peter's saying. That you may obtain a blessing. Romans 12:19, Beloved, never avenge yourself, but leave it to the wrath of God, for it is written, Vengeance is mine, I will repay. We even see that in Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. You've heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for tooth, but I tell you, gives examples, turn the other cheek, go the extra mile. Abigail was ahead of her time in understanding God's nature and her intent, and God's nature and his intent for his people. And the other thing that I take from this is wise people. We need more wise peacemakers in our life, like Abigail. Abigail is such a great example. Brute force can take you lots of places, can't it? You can brute force your way to a lot of things and a lot of achievements. But there's a more persuasive, effective way for people's hearts that Abigail demonstrates. She became a peacemaker through humility and appeal to God and his righteousness and in dignity. And something else as we're closing out, some ways that she does that. Act like the person you know you are. You know you are. What a great appeal to somebody who's already committed to God. And then think to the end, she tells him. Think about what this story is going to say and make your decisions wisely based on the stories we're going to have to tell about ourselves at the end. We need more Abigails in our life. Hope we have some. I know we do here in this congregation as well. Other thoughts? This bell's about to ring. I don't want to cut anybody off. We've got a couple of minutes. Anything anybody wants to add to the class or discussion on Abigail? Yeah, we don't do, justice is rarely dispensed when we take it into our own hands. Very rarely. It wouldn't have been just what David did. Absolutely. 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 You strap your sword on and... I agree.
So, I don't know if it would maybe reacted to another man, but maybe to a woman, reacted to her in that way.
She played the part God had laid out for her perfectly. Absolutely. She was exactly who God designed her to be in all that. Absolutely. Great. All right, that's it. Kids are going to come in. Thanks for your attention.
Right. Have some questions for all these kiddos. Okay, 3 and 4-year-olds. Who was the man? Hi. Who was the man who had a bad heart but a lot of money? Nabal, that's right. Boaz was from last night, and he was a good guy. Yeah, Nabal had a bad heart. Who saved everyone? The girl. Anybody remember her name? Abigail, that's right. Okay. What are some good things that we can put in our hearts? A good heart, wisdom, good stuff. I like it. How about some kind words? Can we have some kind words in our heart? Awesome. Okay, y'all did a great job. All right, 5 and 6-year-olds. Was Nabal a sharing person or a selfish person? Selfish, that's right. What did Nabal create? He created a fight. Was Abigail sharing or selfish? Sharing. And what did Abigail create? Peace. Awesome. Y'all did great in class. All right, 7 and 9-year-olds. What did Nabal's name mean? Fool. Or churlish, if you were in the adult class. Fool. All right, what did David want to do when Nabal insulted him? Kill him and all the men in his household. That's right. What kind of seeds did Abigail plant when she went to meet David? Peace seeds. Did y'all get any of those peace seeds? I see your flower pots up here. That's awesome. What happened to Nabal when Abigail told him what she had done? His heart failed like a stone. That's right. And then 10 days later, he officially died. Great job. All right, 10 to 12-year-olds. Or should I call you actors and actresses? All right. What does Belial mean? Corrupt, good. Foolish, godless. Good job. All right, describe Nabal in one word. Foolish, what else? Corrupt and godless, good. Ill-mannered. All right. What made, okay, just one. I need a hand raise for this one. What made Abigail a Wonder Woman? Yes, Alex. Yep, so rescued Nabal, tried to help him. And what about everybody else in the house? They were saved as well. And how did she do that? How did she talk to David? She did fall at his feet, and she spoke to him with humility and kindness and wisdom and respect. Great work. All right. So we've got another song here. Who will follow Jesus? Who will follow Jesus, standing for the right, holding up his banner in the naked light, listening for his orders, ready to obey? Who will follow Jesus, serving him today? Who will follow Jesus? Who will make reply? I am on the Lord's side, Master, here am I. Who will follow Jesus? Who will make reply? I am on the Lord's side, Master, here am I. All right, we're going to have a prayer in just a moment. So we've just finished night 2 of our VBS. We've got one night left. So Esther is who we're going to be studying about tomorrow. And she has an entire book that is dedicated to her. So if anybody wants some extra brownie points from their teacher tomorrow, I bet if they went home tonight and tomorrow and read Esther or read it with your parents, I bet they would love that. Because it's a long story and not a lot of time to cover it in. All right? So tomorrow night's Esther. We're going to close in a word of prayer. And just like we did last night, parents of some of these younger ones, if you wouldn't mind coming up and grabbing your kiddos, that would be great. Let's pray together. Our Heavenly Father, we're so thankful for the wisdom that we got to read about tonight in this Wonder Woman's life, Abigail. Pray, Father, that we can have a soft answer and that will turn away wrath. Help us, Father, to be like her and to recognize that we can talk to people in a peaceful way. Thank you for Jesus, and it's through his name that we pray. Amen.